behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream.
Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take to you Mary, your wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Spirit. And she will bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins.
For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him I will also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, him I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Assuredly I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back here for a Monday night, and it's episode 35 of the Bible Lens podcast. And there's a lot to go through here tonight. This is going to be a very, very interesting episode. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode that I am doing on how the Nephilim have influenced our world. And last week, if you guys weren't here, episode 35, which is up on our YouTube channel, which is up on Rumble right now. Last week, we talked about how the Nephilim influenced our world from a historical level. So just a little bit of a quick rewind, just kind of catch you up to how we got here. We talked about how who the Nephilim were, how they essentially came to be in a lot of world religions and a lot of mythologies. And people, when they use the word mythology, they think of something that this was like some kind of like made up story, that this wasn't actually that what happened in real life. And we proved last week that no, these are all real stories, and these were all real quote unquote gods who aren't actually gods, but who they were all gods who were all worshipped by numerous countries and numerous nations all over the world. So how exactly did this all happen? How did this all come afoot? And we went into some very interesting information, especially when it comes to, you know, the reason why God decided to flood the world. And we talked about a few issues about, you know, why all these other cultures, keep in mind, are not Christian whatsoever, are retelling the exact same story that was told in Noah, and Noah predates all of these other various alternative narratives to the flood. So you start realizing that if you really look at the world and really look at the world the way that, you know, the Bible looks at it, our history, all of these finds that have taken place in multiple nations for so many years, you start to realize that this wasn't just, you know, some one guy created a folk tale and it just survived for thousands of years. It just so happens to survive for thousands of years. No, these are things that actually really happened, and we're going to do a deep dive into this, because now we're going to look at modern society. Now we're going to look at how our culture, our modern culture, have been influenced by these Nephilim, and how not only are we talking about seeing evidence of the Nephilim here in our world today, we're also going to be talking about the promise from the Bible that when it comes in time to the 7-year tribulation, the final 7 years, I guess you can say, of, you know, of the age, that there are going to be a return of Nephilim here on earth. You're going to see quite literally these beings that you were all, I guess, brainwashed into thinking we're all false idols and just all made up stories, you're going to see them live here on the earth during this time period. So it's going to be a very, very interesting show. There's going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about here tonight that we can go very, very in depth into a lot of it. I just will not have the time period. So I'm trying to get through as much information as I can here on this show, but understand there will be some things that I won't be able to discuss in full detail and full discussion here, but we'll probably do either future episodes on it, or I'll just send you guys back to some of the episodes we've already done based on this topic. So before we get started here, let's just go ahead and go with an introduction here of the show. We are currently live on Rumble, currently live here on Twitter and on YouTube, all three platforms at the moment. I know good buddy Keith is joining us over on our Rumble side right now. On the YouTube side of things, we have Dante joining us here. Spencer here saying that he hates the time changes, and yeah, so sorry for the language, wrong show for that one. Yeah, that's tomorrow night show to do that one. We're trying to keep things very, very PG here for the sake of this conversation. And I know some other people are going to be joining us here later on. Obviously, our good buddies like Kate, Don't Let Them Burn, Awesome One, and a few others. They'll be trickling in as the time goes on. So I want to go ahead and get the ball rolling on this because I wanted to essentially show you the mindset of what inspired me to do this 2-week series, and kind of see that there's a lot of things that are in our culture that people really don't pay that much attention to, or they grace themselves in it, but they don't really think about like the origins of these things. And when you really start looking to how our world came together, you start to see there's a very blatant ties to occultism, to Satanism, to stuff that are on demonic world, false gods, and all these other things, but they're given to us as entertainment. And because a lot of people don't know the true origins of these stories, they just simply view it as entertainment, because why would you if you didn't know what these things are actually based on? But let's go ahead and it's an awesome one. I just mentioned him here. He's already here saying, yo, how's it going? So let's go ahead and get the story here. We're going to go ahead and give you guys a quick recap of last week's show. And I want to start talking about Genesis 6, because this is where the emphasis of this story actually occurred here. So if you guys are looking for the scripture to go along with what we're going to be discussing here tonight, I do have some selected verses, and we're also going to be looking at some videos as well. So I want to start this off as a recap of Genesis 6 verses 1 through 7. Now this is something we went over last week, because I wanted people to understand, okay, what is the Nephilim? What was the source of God's flood? Why did he do all of this? And I had a very interesting conversation earlier this week regarding this topic, and I'll get to this here in a second. But reading Genesis 6 verse 1, it tells us very plainly here, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, and that the sons of gods, now we mentioned this last week, we went into great detail about this, the sons of God are essentially the angels that fell from heaven to the earth when they rebelled with Lucifer and rebelled against God and the armies of heaven. They were kicked out of the earth, cast out of earth. They lost their heavenly status, and as a result of this, they fell down to the earth, and they started to intermingle with the women here, the human women who were here on earth. And it says here that the sons of men saw the daughters of men, and that they were fair, and they took wives to them, all which they had chose. And then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man, for he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. We'll keep a highlight on that one too, because we will come back to this towards the end of the show. There are giants, said there were giants that were on the earth during those days and after that, and the sons of God came onto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So this is the idea of where the Nephilim actually came from. They were the abomination of fallen angels and human women. So they were essentially half human and half angelic beings, fallen angelic beings. And we talked about this last week too. It wasn't just human women that essentially these fallen angels were defiling themselves with. We also talked about last week how it was also animals as well. There was say animals of the land, animals of the sea, animals of the air. So they were essentially trying to corrupt and create abominations all around the entire world of God's creation, which is humanity, and obviously other things he created as well. This is how far the wickedness of these fallen angels were, is that after they got cast out of heaven, they decided they were going to rebel here on earth and essentially turn God's creation against him. And we'll go a little bit more here. Then God saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth, that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. And then it repented the Lord that he had made man on earth, and it had grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man for who I have created on the face of the earth, both man and beast. So there's a very key indication here too. It wasn't just humans that got wiped out during this flood. It was the beasts that also got wiped out. It says the creeping thing as well, and the fowls of the air. So what's telling you is that when these fallen angels were corrupting the earth during this time period, it wasn't just with man. It was, like I said, with beasts, with the creeping things, with the fowls of the air, and it repented him that he had made them, because the fallen angels were making abominations out of his work, to the point where man's thoughts were so evil around this time period, being with these fallen angels. All they continuously thought was evil. And this is where we get the origin of the story of Noah and the flood. This is why God flooded the world in the first place, to kill off the Nephilim. The large majority of them were wiped off with the flood and encompassed the entire earth. I know there's some theories out there that claim that, the flood only impacted like one nation. It wasn't like worldwide. Obviously, I don't believe that that's true at all. So as we talked about in great detail last week, there's flood myths all over the world. It wasn't just one location. You had flood myths in Greece, in Rome, in India, in North America. All of the places all over the world have their own quote-unquote version of the flood myth, which is essentially just a perverted retelling of the story of Noah over and over again. So in order to have all of these alternate versions all over the world, it couldn't just been located just to one location. This is a worldwide flood that literally flooded the entire earth, and this was the reason for it. So go ahead and Leon says, God is not the author of confusion. Why would Moses write sons of God and not fallen angels? We talked about this last week. You also cross-reference that term sons of God with what is described in Job 1, because in Job 1 it talks about Satan, Lucifer, and the sons of God meeting God in the heavenly realm. This is where we get the origin of what happened with Job, when God essentially offered Satan a chance to tempt Job, to dismay God, to despite God, knowing that Job wouldn't fall. So we don't see this term in just only the book of Genesis. We do see this other terms in the Old Testament, and it makes it very clear who this group is talking to here. I also have a few people coming in here saying that Islam is the main religion. Yeah, I don't think that that's true. I don't think that's true. We do have a couple of episodes talking about Islam here tonight as well, but that's not the topic of tonight's show. We're going to go ahead and pop off here. So this is where we left off here last week. I'm gonna go ahead and remove this. There we go. This is where we left off last week, and this was essentially the basis of this whole thing. So we went through a lot of information, both historical information, biblical information, giving you guys lots of details about, like I said, the Nephilim and the story, and how we had the origin of, all of these Greek gods, all the Roman gods, all the Hindu gods that you see all around the world, and they all come from essentially the same lineage of, there were fallen angels during this time period, there were Nephilim during this time period, and essentially what you had here is that you had beings here that in the eyes of human beings looked like gods, because they had superhuman abilities that humans just don't they don't possess. They were massive in size. We talked about the giants in this context here. They had abilities that humans did not have. So for a human being who had never seen anything quite like these beings, you would consider them to be gods. And all over the world, all over the place, you see that these beings were worshipped as gods, and you see this in the Bible over and over again. So where is this going to a modern take here? How do we get exactly to this location? I'm gonna go ahead and tell you how we got here. Roughly about, I would say, a month ago. I think this is roughly a month ago. I was watching, if you guys remember, the 2017 film Wonder Woman. It was the very first Wonder Woman movie that came out with Gal Gadot at the time period. And when I was watching this, I was working on something for Bounding at the time, and I'm rewatching the very end where Wonder Woman is talking to Ares, and I find it to be a very, very interesting conflict here with this story, because I noticed that when I was listening to the dialogue, something in the dialogue just wasn't quite clicking with me. Like something in the dialogue that we were listening to didn't feel quite right, if that's the best way to describe it here. It felt like that there was something off. It felt like when I'm really listening to what these guys are saying, I'm listening to a story of quote unquote the gods talking about how humanity essentially ruined everything. And I'm listening to these people talking about how the gods were, how the gods were talking about how humanity ruined our design and how we were kicked out of the heavens. And when I really started paying attention to what they were saying, it almost like clicked with me in a very weird way. It's like, this almost sounds like this dialogue is coming directly out of the mouth of a fallen angel. And the only best way to kind of show you exactly what I'm talking about here is to play a little bit of it here. So this is from 2017 film Wonder Woman. I don't give you the whole plot here, but this is Wonder Woman talking to Ares. Wonder Woman at this point is trying to find Ares to stop him because he's the god of war, quote unquote, and he's causing all the men on the earth to fight each other and kill each other. So let's play a little bit of this dialogue here. I'm gonna see if you guys notice a pattern that I noticed watching this. So let's go ahead and play the video.
Sir Patrick.
You were right, Diana. They don't deserve our help. They only deserve destruction.
You're him.
I am. But I am not what you thought I was.
Speed up just a little bit here.
I am not your enemy, Diana. I am the only one who truly knows you, and who truly knows them as you now do. They have always been and always will be weak, cruel, selfish, and capable of the greatest horrors.
Like I said, you have to pay attention to what exactly is saying here. Then you'll start seeing a lot of the imagery come together here as we get deeper. I'm going to continue the video for this point.
All I ever wanted was for the gods to see how evil my father's creation was. But they refused.
I am Diana of Themyscira,
So I destroyed them.
daughter of Hippolyta, and I'm here to complete her mission. The God Killer.
My dear child, that is not the God Killer. You are. Only a god can kill another god. Zeus left the child he had with the Queen of the Amazons as a weapon to use against me.
You liar. I compel you to tell me the truth.
I am. I am
skip
the
here.
God of truth. Mankind stole this world from us. They ruined it day by day. And I, the only one wise enough to see it, was left too weak to stop them.
So keep in mind the imagery that what you're seeing here And we talked about a lot of these gods. We recycle back over to this point again to kind of reaffirm this, but we did talk about this last week. But it's the idea that these characters are based off of the gods of Greek legend, or the Greek god legends. And what you're seeing here is Ares being quite literally kicked out of the heavens here. So if you're trying to figure out exactly what the imaging of this story is, we talked about the fallen angels quite literally being kicked out of heaven, and here you have the main character Ares, based on one of these Greek gods, being kicked out of the heavens itself. It's like when it seems so blatant when it's put it to you in this perspective. Like I said, it goes over a lot of people's heads in the course of the story. But like I said, just pay attention to what he's saying, because he's talking specifically about humanity. And we talked about how the fallen angels wanted to corrupt God's creation, and how they have a very let's just say negative, you can say evil view of humanity. I'll just play it here.
Enough to see it. Was left too weak to stop them. All these years I have struggled alone, whispering into their ears ideas, inspiration for formulas, weapons. But I don't make them use them. They start these wars on their own. All I do is orchestrate an armistice I know they cannot keep, in the hope they will destroy themselves. But it has never been enough. Until you.
So he's quite literally talking about here, and this is the premise of the movie here, but I just want to put this into context. This is a guy who was quite literally influencing humans to start wars with one another. That's why they called him the god of war. So this is a guy, keeping that in the context of what we talked about here with Nephilim and fallen angels and in demons as well, how they were intermingling with the humans and caused them to essentially do evil things, to the point where even God himself said that the thoughts of man became evil continuously, which means that all they wanted to do was slaughter each other and rebel against God and do very, very wicked things. And it was because of the influence from these fallen angels.
When you first arrived, I was going to crush you. But I knew that if only you could see what the other gods could not, then you would join me, and with our powers combined, we could finally end all the pain, all the suffering, the destruction they bring. And we could return this world to the paradise it was before them. Forever.
It's almost as if you're watching an indirect reference to the Garden of Eden. And when we talk about the Garden of Eden, we've mentioned this in a few episodes here now, but let's make it recur it again. What happened in the Garden of Eden? God created the world. It was good. You created man. Then he created a woman for man. And then what happened? Satan, as the serpent, deceived the woman into eating the tree of knowledge. Adam then followed eating the tree of knowledge. They brought sin into the world, and essentially it corrupted not only the nature of human beings, but the nature of the entire world before. So you're talking about, you got to keep this in mind in the context here too, is that the angels knew about essentially the creation of the world and knew about what the world was before Satan corrupted everything. So you're talking about a God made an anime, exactly right. But then no, you're talking about in the context here is that they knew what the world was before the fall of man. They knew what it was before sin entered the world. And they're talking about, in the context of this story here, getting rid of humanity to return to the way things were before humans. Now there's a big, debate, and I think I may have talked about this here before on a previous episode, about a lot of people, not a lot of people, I'm not gonna say a lot of people, but there is some belief out there that the reason why that Satan rebelled against God could do a lot to do with the fact that he created humanity, that he created humans in his own image. Now, of course, because Satan was full of pride and he wanted to rebel against the Most High, he specifically chose to rebel against us, because he viewed us in the image of God, who he hated and wanted to overthrow. So there's a lot of I guess parallels there, especially when you consider that when God created the world and put Adam and Eve on the earth, it was fine, but it wasn't until Satan came down and corrupted them and deceived them into sin that everything became, let's just say, the state that it is now, or we're in the fallen state that we are now. So there's a reason, and there's, like I said, there's biblical scripture to back this up, that this is very possible, how, the fall of not only humanity but the fall of those in heaven started, and this is how we got to the position that we are right now. So when I saw that, that episode, well, I mean, I saw that episode, that movie, I should say. When I saw that movie, I was like, wow, some of those things that are being talked about there are a little too on the nose. Like some of the things that are being talked about here are very, very interesting on a certain level. And I started thinking to myself, okay, we talked a little bit about the Greek gods last week, talked a little bit about the Roman gods. It's like, so how many of these superhero stories that we all enamor ourselves with today are actually based on the accounts of these fallen angels, of these Nephilim from years and years ago? Because we all know that when it comes to DC comic books, we look at, characters such as Superman, we look at Wonder Woman, Batman, and things of that nature, even Flash, for an example. Most of these characters that were created, that became, mainstays here in the United States of America, and honestly worldwide, as the love of comic books grew around the entire world, a lot of these characters were based on the mythologies of, these Greek gods, of these Roman gods. Wonder Woman is actually based on a figure that you actually do find in the Bible. A lot of people don't know this, but obviously the character of Wonder Woman named Diana is actually based on the Diana, aka Artemis of the Ephesians. Now you do see this. Let me go ahead and pop this up so you guys can see this here. You do see this on in the Bible. I believe it's the book of Acts. If I'm not mistaken, I do believe it's the book of Acts that you do see this here. But there's a talk about Dianus, the Artemis of the Ephesians here. And it says that the Latin name Diana was adopted by an old Latin and what's it, Vulgate, as the equivalent of the Greek Artemis. So there's obviously, when you look at a lot of the accounts of these gods, these alternate gods, you see a lot of it being reflected in alternate cultures. Obviously there's a pagan version of this, a Roman version of this, a Greek version of this, but they're all meant to essentially represent the exact same thing. And you're talking about a god that was worshipped in Greece at this time period. And there's a part where Paul, during the early stages of the church, which if you look at the book of Acts, is essentially the church history, the way that they spread the gospel and got people, essentially saved souls, and all that whole thing is in the book of Acts. Very important to know, especially if you call yourself a Christian. But Artemis here was essentially a goddess, and you start seeing a lot of these let's say themes that are repeated in multiple cultures here. This is why when you look at the pagan god, the demonic god, if you really look at it, of Ishtar or Isis or Astaroth, you see the name is changed several times. They may have 40 different references to the same god, but it's all essentially the same thing. And Diana of the Ephesians was one of the I guess so what's the good word to say here, incarnations of this god. And this is essentially what the character of Wonder Woman was based off of, essentially the Greek adaptation of this god. It was like once a mother goddess, a virgin goddess of the woods and the hills. Her temples is in Ephesians. I think I mentioned that Paul was trying to preach in Ephesians at this time period, but he got a lot of resistance, and this is in biblical text too. He got a lot of resistance from the people there, because obviously they were too fond of the gods that were created by their own hands, that were created by like their own minds and whatnot, and they didn't want to hear about a coming Lord Jesus Christ coming to save people from their sins. So when Paul was preaching the gospel in this region, all of a sudden everyone was saying, hail, I think it was Diana of the Ephesians, saying that I reject your God and this is going to be like my God. That's essentially what was happening there in the book of Acts. And I think there's actually a passage I can pull up here so you guys can get a good view of this here. This is in the book of Acts. This is 19, go through 24 through 35 here, because this will give you a good example of what was going on here during this time period. Let me actually pull this up here so you guys can read it just a little bit better. There we go. And it says here that, like I said, Acts chapter 19, 24 to 35. For a certain man, Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, which is obviously the Diana of the Ephesians that we're talking about here, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. And he called them together with the workers of occupation. And he said, men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade, saying that, hey, look, we have our prosperity by essentially worshiping and honoring this false god. You see this also being shown in the book of Jeremiah, when Jeremiah was trying to get the people to stop worshiping what they called the Queen of Heaven, which was Ishtar, which is Ashtaroth. And I find it very funny that some of our Roman Catholic friends do not make the parallel that the only time that the Queen of Heaven is ever mentioned in the Bible, it is in a very, very negative light, referring to a demonic false goddess. And you see that there's a lot of parallels. They make that with the modern interpretation of Mary. We said all of these stories we just see recycled over and over again because these exceptions always work. But I'll continue. More so, you see here that it's not only at Ephesus, but throughout all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands. So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into, as I said, disruptive, but also our temple of the great goddess Diana, who may be despised and all her magnificence destroyed, to all of Asia and the world to worship. So there was a lot of hostility here with Paul's message about Jesus Christ in this area where they wanted to worship the goddess of Diana rather than Jesus Christ, the true God of the true God of Scripture, the true God of the Jews, the true God of the Greek, because obviously there's a big conflict with the Jews and the Greek during this time period. So yes, you do see these Greek gods in the Bible. You do see essentially the conflict here with people essentially falling towards false gods, and this is something that's been going on for thousands of years. Now when they heard this, they said they were full of wrath and cried out, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." So when Paul was promoting the gospel, they rebelled against them, and they said they rejected Jesus, and they said, "To great is Diana of the Ephesians," this false Greek god. And the whole city was filled with confusion, and they rushed up to the theater on one accord, having seized Gaius, Artishus, and Macedonians, and then Paul's travel companions. And then Paul wanted to go into all the people. The disciples would not allow him. And then some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent him to the pleading where he would not venture into the theater. Some therefore cried one thing, some called another, for this assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had came together. And then they drew Alexander out of the multitudes, the Jews putting him forward, and Alexander mentioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. But then they found out that he was a Jew, and with all the one voice cried out for 2 hours, "Great is Diana the Ephesians." So they found out that he was Jewish, and they figured that, oh, he's here to preach Jesus Christ, the Jewish God, so let's all reject him. That's essentially what happened there. And then it said the city clerk had quieted the crowd, and the men of Ephesians, that man is there that does not know the great city of the Ephesians is a temple guardian of the great goddess Diana, and the image which fell down from Zeus. This is Greek mythology here. It's believed that, Diana or Artemis, depending on the translation, depending on the lore here, was the daughter of Zeus. We talked about Zeus last week. Our good buddy Will123 has a video up here where he actually makes the link that Zeus may have been Satan himself, or may have been another massively powerful fallen angel who integrated with the women during that time period. Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, what happens here is that when you get, these comic book stories, like they'll take things from what they believe to be mythology. Now, whether these people knew about the true origins of the story or not, it's something that I can't confirm or deny, or whatever the case may be. There's no real evidence to prove that. There's no real evidence to prove that when the creator of Wonder Woman was looking at, these books and being inspired by Greek mythology to create Wonder Woman, that he knew about, the demonic origin of these Greek gods. He knew about essentially the rebellion against Christ, using these gods and making them popular figures. I can't prove any of that. Right? So that goes up to the creator of these properties, who have long since gone. So I can't make an argument based on that. All I can say is that when you look at mythology and you look at these stories, these are in fact real stories that actually happen, and there are biblical accounts of these stories. So these characters that we use in our comic books, that we prop up and make popular in our comic books, which then turns into television shows and movies, which turns into merchandise, so on and so forth, you're seeing a reincarnation in a modern sense of the same Greek gods that people have been worshiping for quite literally thousands of years, right? Now, am I saying that people, if you have a Wonder Woman plushie in your bed, that you're worshiping a false god? I'm not saying that you're doing that. What I'm saying is you have to understand that there are exactly real world implications and a real world truth to a lot of these stories here. Now, that was from the book of Acts. I'll go back to Acts here in a little bit. I want to see, I'm going to hold off on that one a little bit too, but this is Greek. Where do I want to shift here today? Because I did talk about that. Okay, let's talk about his now, because I wanted to talk about something that I found very, very interesting, and we're going to keep it on kind of the superhero level here. But so we ask ourselves, how is it do these superhero characters find like their origins? You look at characters like we mentioned here, a Spider-Man, a Superman, an Iron Man, and a Batman, and we just look at them as superhero cape crusaders and really nothing else. But is there an origin to these characters that essentially the greater public really doesn't know about? I think we've heard enough interviews over the last several years saying that, you know, Superman, for instance, was essentially in a lot of ways an allegory to Jesus Christ, right? A son that came down to earth and essentially became Earth's protector. And a lot of people who have done superhero comic books, movies, television shows have all used Superman as kind of like an allegory to Christ. Now, some people will go a little bit far to say that, you know, Superman is essentially a counterfeit Christ, because it's essentially presenting the world a Christ-like figure that presents, you know, this idea of redemption, you know, truth, especially when we talk about truth, justice in the American way, that's perverted away from biblical truth. Now, I don't know if I would go quite that far with some of these characters, but I do have to point out at the same time, there are a lot of comic book characters who have been influenced by, let's just say, evil, demonic, or occult things, and these have become some of our most popular writers in the comic book sphere for many, many decades. So I'm pretty sure most people have heard the name Grant Morrison before. Grant Morrison is very, very big in the comic book industry, especially when it comes to like DC comics as well. I says that was a great way of dealing with the point. Not bad from like them, just not all fiction. Yeah, here's what I say. I know that there's people out there who just see these things as simply just comic books. Like I get that, right? What I'm saying is that there's a lot of origins to the way that these characters came about that a lot of people don't know, and that's what makes it a little bit problem, because the consumer here just sees it as, oh, I just like this book because he has like lots of cool powers and whatnot, and look, when we're all kids, we all felt the same way. That's why we like characters like Spider-Man and Superman and Batman, because we just thought that they were cool. We didn't know any of the alternative history behind it. So I want to talk about this video. This comes from Good Fight Ministries, and they actually did 2 videos here that I want to cover. But one is a very interesting tale from, like I said, Grant Morrison, and there's a little bit into Robert Downey Jr. here as well, but I really just want to focus on the Grant Morrison case of this, because this goes into something that I've actually covered in a film that I reviewed last year called Caviar. Now, if you haven't seen this movie called Caviar, it came out in 2023, a year ago. It's a low indie like horror movie, low budget indie horror film. I'm gonna be straight with you guys here. It's not a good movie. It's really not a good movie. It's one of those, like, the best way I could say it's kind of like Alex Jones type films, but it's not well done. The effects are very, very poor here. But I think one of the things that is very, very interesting about this film is that they do take real life accounts and real life interviews of things that people have said, especially in government and in culture. And one of the things that I found very, very interesting about this is that they had a guy who was a former FBI guy who talked about kind of the origins of people contacting the spirit world, aka contacting the demonic realm. And what he was saying here is that during this time period when they were experimenting with drugs, I guess they were trying to find like some kind of way to see if they can use like these drugs for like wartime, if they can get any kind of advantage, which if you guys have watched movies and television shows for God knows how many years, there's always some kind of angle of, well, if we give, these soldiers some kind of superpowers and we can have our own army of super soldiers. That all comes from real stuff, just so you guys know. Like the pipeline from the CIA and the FBI to Hollywood is a very, very well-known one. So when they start putting these things in the television shows and movies, this is kind of just them admitting that, yeah, we have tried to do this, or we have done this in the past. But we were saying that he was giving these soldiers psychedelic drugs to see what the effects would be on, their bodies and whatnot. And they would start seeing all of these beings that at the time they just thought was all in their head. They thought that, these beings were just figments of their imagination, or as we like to say, they were just having a bad trip. What happened was that as they continued these trials, they started to essentially relay information. These beings were relaying them information that the other people who were involved in the drug trials could not have possibly known. So this isn't like someone was on a bad trip. It came up with this new form technology that was suppressed in his mind for all these years. Like, these are things that these people couldn't have possibly known. So they start to figure out that these beings weren't actually figments of their imagination. They were actually talking to people considered to be in the spirit realm, right? And this is what they admitted back in the government in the 40s and the 50s. Obviously, we know the big impact that drug culture and psychedelic culture had in the 1960s. So this is all kind of a precursor to that. And for many, many years, people were contacting these things that they thought were all in their head, and actually turns out that it wasn't. So I want to play this clip here of Grant Morrison, because he's talking about essentially being influenced by these things. And I was supposed to say, I never heard you mention this. You have to tell me what you haven't heard me mention here, because I went through kind of a big thing there, so you have to let me know what you were talking about. Santa Deep Side. Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about this video here. I'm just gonna play just a little bit of it, but what you're gonna see here is that Grant Morrison, who, let's be very, very real here, by his own admission, is an occultist, and he does believe in various types of magic, and he has talked about, quite literally, contacting beings that he uses to essentially motivate his work and influence his work. This is what's going on here. Like I said, a very short clip that I'm going to play here. If you want to watch the full video, I'll give it to you guys so you guys can watch it on your own time, but we're only going to play a couple of minutes of this guy. I just want to play specifically the Grant Morrison portion of this out.
Grant Morrison, believed by many to be the top comic writer of the last decade, is not only a practitioner of Satanist Aleister Crowley's magic, but promotes Crowley's magic to young fans and encourages them to practice Crowley's magic and sigil magic to summon demonic entities. We can see great similarities in the diabolical teaching of Grant Morrison and the ceremonial magic of Robert Downey Jr. when he prepared to land the role of Iron Man. Grant Morrison stated in his writing Pop Magic that one could summon spirits to take possession of their bodies and make them a successful actor by practicing ceremonial magic, stating, quote, "The sigil, which is a symbol used to summon spirits, takes a magical desire or intent. Let's say, it is my desire."
But by the way, like I said, just in case if you guys think that he's taking anything here like out of context, if you search Grant Morrison, he does talk about the sigil. He does talk about a lot of other forms of magic that he uses to contact spirits, to essentially manifest things, conjure up things. So he's a guy who's very much into the occult. So I'm not sure. I don't think that this is like new information to like a lot of you guys, but this is something that is very, very well known with Grant.
To be a great actor, end quote. This is probably quite similar to what Robert Downey Jr. did. Morrison states, quote, "Pick a traditional god or demon from a book on magic." And he goes on to say if one is feeling hard, that they can, quote, "pick a demon from one of the medieval grimoires and hope you're strong enough to handle the intense negative feelings demons embody." Robert Downey Jr., when calling for help to win the part for Iron Man, surrounded himself with imagery that would evoke such a spirit. This is exactly what leading comic and superhero writer and practitioner of Satanist Aleister Crowley's magic, Grant Morrison, advises, stating, for example, that when one is calling upon the entity Hermes, one can use comics and images of the comic superhero Flash, who was inspired by the false demon god Hermes, as well as other implements that would be conducive of summoning such a spirit. Morrison advises, quote, "Call fervently upon Hermes, luxuriate in his attributes, drink coffee or Red Bull in his name, or take a line of speed, depending on your levels of drug abuse. Fill your head with speedy images of jet planes, jet cars, and bullet trains. Play Ray of Light by Madonna and call down Hermes. Surround yourself with Flash comics and call down Hermes. Tell him how very wonderful he is in your own words, and then call him into yourself." The arrival of the God will be unmistakable. You should experience a sense of presence or even mild possession.
So, in case you're not following here, he's literally telling people how to be possessed by demons. And these aren't just like metaphorical demons, like he said at the very beginning, to use the real name of demons and gods, not only just like the Greek gods of old, but even demons in occult books, going as far back as that. And one thing you'll notice about the Bible too, there's a reason why certain demonic entities and names outside of the ones that are mentioned, like Baal, Moloch, Ashtoreth, that they don't give you the names of these entities. And the reason why is because knowing that people have a rebellious nature, especially rebellious nature against God, that they would actually try to essentially find the names of these demons and try to conjure up these demons for their own personal gain, right? Because this is how we talk about why so many people are feeling feelings of like oppression and anxiety and the negative feeling. Like, these are textbook examples of the symptoms of demonic oppression. And this is one of the top comic book writers of the last several years, not only pushing this, but admitting that he has used this to influence his own work. He talked about there, I'm not sure if you guys caught that, how, you know, the character of the Flash was based on the Greek god Hermes, and he named that as well. And like I say, if you notice that a lot of the DC characters, it's not just DC, we'll get to here in a second, but you notice a lot of the DC characters are essentially reflections of these Greek gods. We talk about Iron Man being not Iron Man, did I say Iron Man or Aquaman? I meant to say, sorry, Aquaman being a representation of a Greek god. We talked about Wonder Woman. So these are characters that are based on real life mythologies, real life false gods who were worshipped thousands of years ago. And now he's essentially using, well, quote unquote, his magic, his Crawley magic here, to conjure up the spirits of these things in order for personal gain, to become famous, to become rich, to acquire things that, you know, they previously couldn't acquire because they felt like that these entities could give them special powers that the average human couldn't have. This is essentially what happened in Genesis 6 with the fallen angels and the human beings. If you read the book of Enoch, which I did talk about some of my problems with the book of Enoch last week as well, but if you read the book of Enoch, it talks about how these fallen angels taught humans essentially, you know, how to do occultic magic with roots and with a lot of things of the earth, taught them how to essentially make weapons so that they can quite literally fight each other and kill each other. I mean, all these things are based on real things that actually happen. And like I said, a lot of people don't really know this because, like I said, when they're watching a comic book movie or a television show or just reading a book, it's just presented all as entertainment, and no one takes it as anything more but entertainment. But there's always a real element to a lot of these stories that happen here. Mike says that we all know that Hollywood worships demons and false gods like Mula and Baphomet. They show it by rituals and practices they promote. I think they're becoming a lot more blatant with it now, and we'll talk about why they're doing this, because I do want to bring this back up to to Revelation here. That's going to be at the very end of this show. And yeah, like I said, Osborne probably didn't know some of these things. So I just want to play just a couple minutes of that, because that pretty much just helps you understand exactly like what we're talking about here. This is a full 30-minute video, so if you guys want to check that out on your own time, I did give you guys a link so you guys can catch that on your own. You can guys get a little bit more information there. I just don't have enough time to go all in on that specific one today, but I do have another one here for Good Fight Ministries, and this kind of goes back to something that we talked about here about 4 or 5 weeks ago. The episode we did, we talked about the whole idea of Hollywood selling their soul to the devil, right? And you guys remember our good buddy Rob Motto was on that episode with us. And what we discovered watching that video is that during, you know, the 60s, the 70s, there were a lot of musicians who were influenced by Aleister Crowley. And Aleister Crowley was a well-known, famous Satanist and occultist, a guy who, you know, promoted the idea of do as thou wilt, which is essentially, you know, don't listen to God, do whatever you want to do, you're your own gods now. And we see this promoted in our culture time and time again. So many artists during that time period were influenced by Aleister Crowley, who, keep in mind, was an outright Satanist. Yeah, he wasn't like one of those, well, you know, I don't actually like worship the devil or anything like that. No, he admitted many times that he would conjure up demons, that he would do wicked things. He would always do these like occult rituals. And so many people in the entertainment industry, specifically in in the music industry were influenced by him. People like Led Zeppelin, people like, you know, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix. Like it just goes on and on and on. If you haven't seen that episode, like I said, I believe it's episode 29, I want to say 29 or 30, we'll talk about the celebrities selling their soul to the devil. Go back and watch that one, because we go into much greater detail in that whole conversation. But I do want to bring this up here because, believe it or not, when we look at the origins of the comic book character Doctor Strange, a lot of people don't know this, was actually was created and crafted based on Aleister Crowley. And here's a little video detailing the origins of that character. And it's very, very interesting here too, that I'll note, but I think I'll give this one to you guys later on here. Some of you guys who are like old school fans of Doctor Strange, like going back to the 60s, may have heard this story before, but I do want to play this video. This is talking about how the comic book industry influenced Doctor Strange based on Aleister Crowley.
Incredibly, Doctor Strange, as the one who is portrayed as Marvel's key man to fight against God at both the creation of the universe and the end times, had a test run prior to his existence to see if the world was ready for a superhero modeled by Satanist Aleister Crowley in the form of Dr. Droom, not to be confused with Dr. Doom. Dr. Droom, as the Sorcerer Supreme, was a precursor to the one who would eventually be recast as Doctor Strange just 2 years later. Now notice the obvious resemblance between the magician Dr. Droom in his first appearance in 1961 and the obvious resemblance to Satanist and magician Aleister Crowley. There's no doubt once you examine the facts that Dr. Droom and later Dr. Strange were based on Satanist Aleister Crowley. In his Marvel origin story, Dr. Droom, like Aleister Crowley, is British. Like Crowley, he desires to go to the East for more occult knowledge. He states that he wants to acquire first-hand knowledge and learn about the mystical arts and practices. Like Crowley, Dr. Droom actually goes all the way to the Himalayas. Crowley made repeated infamous trips to the Himalayas, one in 1902 where he waved his revolver at other climbers and insisted he take his occult library up K2. Crowley returned to the Himalayas in 1905 when 4 members of his team fell to their deaths. He didn't even respond to their cries for help. He wrote that he had no sympathy for them and that he had passed their dead bodies later without even stopping. These deaths would be but a few of the many mysterious deaths that followed Crowley in his wicked wake, including several suicides and many professed child sacrifices. In Dr. Droom's origin story, he goes to visit an alien Tibetan Lama who needs medical attention. He will only find years later that the ancient Lama is the Ancient One in disguise. The Lama makes Dr. Droom face a series of trials to prove himself because he is dying and wants Dr. Droom to follow in his footsteps as the master of black magic. In a reprint of Dr. Droom's original Amazing Adventures, Dr. Droom reappears with a new look and a new name as Dr. Druid. Here we see that Dr. Droom is now given some hair, so he's no longer made to look like Aleister Crowley. Perhaps because by the 1970s, too many people were now aware of who the Satanist was, and they would have made the damning connection that Marvel was glorifying a perverted Satanist and professed child killer in popular children's comics. Like Satanist Aleister Crowley, who was known for synthesizing various forms of Western magic with Eastern mysticism, Dr. Droom, and/or Druid, learns how to integrate both Western and Eastern occultism. In the retelling of Dr. Droom's origin story, he is not only a Brit that goes to the Himalayas to study the occult, but like Crowley, we read that the Tibetan tells him, "Within you, Dr. Druid, lies the power of the ancient Britons, and with my added knowledge of the East, you could never fall prey to the unknown. Do you accept my gift of wisdom?" Satanist Aleister Crowley, as you can see, also used the eye in the triangle as a symbol of the new eon of the hawk-headed god of Horus. When Crowley wrote his Book of the Law, he claims to have taken dictation.
By the way, so just in case you guys didn't know that, that is for an ancient demon god of Egypt, actually. And I've noticed this. People have started to popularize that Eye of Horus. I've seen people get tattoos of Eye of Horus. That's not an occult tattoo. That's not. Some people might think that looks cool. That's literally quite literally a demonic tattoo. Just in case you guys didn't realize that, because like I said, even Aleister Crowley, known Satanist, used it. He did it for a very known reason. So.
From a demonic entity called Iwas, who he later identifies as Satan himself. Near the end of the Book of the Law, Horus, or Satan, declares, quote, "With my hawk's head, I peck out the eyes of Jesus as he hangs upon the cross." Thus, the Eye of Horus was symbolic of the new satanic age and the rise of the Antichrist. Here we see that Dr. Droom, now called Dr. Druid, like Crowley, also used the occult symbol of the eye in the triangle. We see this symbol over and over again in depictions of Dr. Droom. Of course, the eye in the triangle was later worked into the supreme sorcerer Dr. Strange's attire as well, but then called the Eye of Agamotto instead of the Eye of Horus. Calling it the Eye of Horus would have been just too obvious. Stan Lee, who said he always liked Dr. Droom, further stated, "And one day, while we were trying to think of some new heroes, I thought I'd like to bring back a magician. And I gave him the name Dr. Strange." Even Wikipedia got this one right, stating, according to Lee, Dr. Droom was essentially succeeded by Dr. Strange. However, while Dr. Strange was no longer bald like Dr. Droom, or even balding like Droom's retelling as Dr. Druid, Stan Lee still created Dr. Strange in the image of the Crowleyan Dr. Droom as the supreme sorcerer. They even blatantly borrowed major elements from Dr. Droom's origin story, which again mirrored much of the life of Satanist Aleister Crowley. Like Dr. Droom, Dr. Strange goes to visit the Ancient One. Though no longer disguised as a Tibetan Lama, Dr. Strange, like Dr. Droom, also goes to the Himalayas. This time to a place called Kamar Taj, described as, quote, a hidden land high in the Himalayas. However, this time rather than going to give medical attention, as Dr. Droom did, Dr. Strange goes to receive medical attention for his mangled hands, which were harmed in a car accident. Like Dr. Droom, the arrogant Dr. Strange must pass a test before he is conferred with the power of black magic. Note in this.
So I want to pause here for a second because I really do want to hit this point home. You guys may have heard me talk about this in a previous episode. I brought it up on several podcasts before. I'm not sure if you guys have heard me say this, so I'm going to repeat it here. If you guys remember, I think it was about 3 years ago, we got Doctor Strange 2, which was the Multiverse of Madness. And the way that film came about was that it was C. Robert Cargill and Scott Derrickson who came together for the concept. They wanted to do a Marvel horror film. That was kind of the concept that they wanted to do. And they had created differences with the studio because apparently they wanted to go a much further with the horror concept that the studio allowed them to go. So they ended up leaving the project. I believe it was Scott Raimi who came in after the fact to kind of finish it up. But I remember going back and I'm listening to people. Keep in mind, these are not Christians. These are not right-wing people. These are not conservative Christians or conservative right-wingers at all. These were very secular, very liberal people talking about this film openly. And they were saying quite literally in this Doctor Strange movie, this Doctor Strange 2 that came out a few years ago, that they were surprised by how demonic the film was. Now keep in mind, these are people who themselves probably are into the occult, that are probably into witchcraft, that are probably into various forms of black magic and stuff like that. And they went to go watch this film, and then they admitted on camera that they were surprised by how demonic the movie was, which means that there was a lot of references in that movie and a lot of things in that movie that have direct ties to black magic and occultism. Now, when you go there and you're watching this movie, and I believe the movie almost did like $1 billion. It might have been the very last MCU film that actually has done $1 billion, and that was like 3 years ago. That shows you how far Disney has fallen off here. But yet you have people who are going into there watching this film thinking that, oh, this is just some superhero entertainment and that's what I'm consuming it as. And then people who know exactly what these symbols represent, what the magic represents, what the books that they're using in the film and all these things, and they know that these are all real occult properties, all real occult symbols, all real occult. So they know that the stuff that's going on in this movie, it may seem fake to an audience that has no idea what any of this stuff is, but they themselves know how real a lot of this stuff is. So, and then you have a character that's doing essentially what is being described as demonic by non-Christians, by the way, and his origin story goes all the way back to a character that was modeled specifically after Aleister Crowley, a well-known Satanist. And a lot of people don't see this. A lot of people, like I said, it'll just go completely over their head. Was hallucinogenic, yes, very, very well. And like I said, there's a lot of hallucinogenics and psychedelic drugs, and there's a reason why they label it hallucinogenic, right? Because they're making it seem like when you see these things, when you see these entities, that, oh, it's just all in your head, don't worry about it, they're not real or anything, you're just having like a bad trip. I've talked about this with Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan on his podcast all the time talks about taking DMT and other forms of psychedelic drugs, and everyone talks about seeing the exact same creatures, whether it's, jesters and elves and all of these other entities that they see when they take these drugs, and they all think that, oh no, it's just a representation of your conscience, it's just something of your mind. But notice that when certain cultures, especially like South America, other places like that, when you take these drugs, you're supposed to take these things with a quote unquote a shaman. Now, why would you have to take something with a shaman if this is all in your head? Well, because when you take these drugs, you're actually opening your consciousness to being essentially possessed by these entities that are not just in your head, but are actually demonic in nature. Could be straight up demons, could actually be Nephilim that were seized into the abyss. We'll talk about what that actually means later on here in the show. So people don't, because we live in a secular world that separates itself from God and separates itself essentially from the truth, they're always looking for an alternative answer to what a lot of these things like actually are. Like they think to themselves, well, it can't possibly be God, it can't possibly be Satan and demons, because I don't believe in any of that stuff. So what is the explanation, the secular worldly explanation for all of these things that are happening? And they're trying to essentially find a way to cope with the truth, which is not actually the truth at all. They're trying to find a lie to cope with the truth is the best way to put it here. So you see this themes over and over again when, like I said, when you have these people who are talking, who are not of God, who are not Christians, and they're all saying the exact same thing. This is when you start noticing patterns that, hey, patterns, I should say, that, hey, maybe there's something a little more going on here. Horus was actually a really big Hermetic order of the Golden Gods. Said Crowley was a member before going off on his own into weird things. Yeah, so I haven't done a full-fledged episode on this yet. I think we kind of alluded to it a little bit with the episode we did a few weeks ago, but Aleister Crowley influenced our culture in more ways I think people truly understand, because that he wasn't just like one guy doing like wacky. He influenced all of the biggest stars, the biggest comic book writers, like everyone who is directly influenced in what we would consider culture right now was influenced by this man. And these people put a lot of his teachings and his belief into their art, into their films, into their television, and it's become so popularized now that people see these things and they completely detached it from the origin, which goes back to a literal Satanist, Aleister Crowley. I do want to bring this up here just real quick too, this before we go on to our next segment here. Somebody has sent this to me earlier, and it's a very famous last quoted words from well-known Satanists, right? So you look at a lot of guys who spent their entire life worshiping Satan, rebelling against God, just spewing all kinds of like hatred of Christianity, promotion of Satan and demons and the occult, all the other thing. Anton LaVey was obviously another big guy who was very, very popular in the 60s and 70s with the Satanist movement. He wrote the Satanic Bible, did satanic rituals, witchcraft, all these whole things. He had so many albums that were based off of his work and his teachings as well. You know what his famous last words were, according on his deathbed? This was his famous last words. Oh my, what have I done? There's something very wrong. There's something very wrong. There's something very wrong. And then he died. This is a man who quite literally spent his entire life worshiping Satan and the occult, got to his deathbed, and he said, oh God, what have I done? Essentially, just what he said. He said, what have I done? Well, it's too late. I hate to break it to you. When you're at that point, the damage is done. So I don't think Anton LaVey made the cut. I'm just going to say that here. And then Aleister Crowley, the guy who we've been talking about here throughout the course of the show, his famous last words on his deathbed, and this has been verified a few times now, saying that, I am perplexed, Satan, get out. Now, some of these quotes will just say, I am perplexed. They say that, well, you didn't say Satan, get out, but all the ones that are verified said that I am perplexed, and the last part of that was Satan, get out. So a lot of these guys who spent their entire life on the side of evil and on the side of Satan at their deathbed at the very last moment, I think they realized the seriousness of what they have essentially spent their entire life working on, because the Bible is very, very clear on this. It says all men, whether they're believers or non-believers, will one day bow and acknowledge Jesus Christ as the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. All of them will. And if you spent your entire life here on this earth, not only rebelling against God, rebelling against Christ, but essentially causing others to do the exact same thing, and who knows how many people have been led to hell based on the teachings of Crowley and LaVey and the people who continuously promote these things. It's like, yeah, there's a home that a lot of these people are going to fall themselves in. That's called the lake of ever burning fire. But we'll get to that when we talk about Revelation here in just a second. So So a lot of people, like I said, they don't know a lot of these things. A lot of people are not familiar with, a lot of these concepts here. But how are we going to essentially swing this all back together here? So I want to read this passage from Luke, because this is going to be kind of our closer here when we talk about what is happening here. So I'm going to go to Luke. This is Luke 17. I'll pop it up for you guys here. And in Luke, let me go ahead and read this. Sorry. Let me go ahead and update this here. I don't know why it's slow moving on my end, but you guys should be seeing it fine. There we go. Luke 17, 26 through 37. And I just want to read this. This is Jesus talking, and he's talking about his second coming. Now, if you guys don't understand this concept, we have talked about it here before. So let me give you guys just a quick little refresher here. When Jesus returns, when he does come back to earth, a lot of people are obviously like, oh, I can't wait for Jesus to come back. I can't wait for Jesus to come back. And I understand the sentiment of that, but you have to understand the reality of what it means when Jesus comes back. Because when Jesus comes back, it's going to mean a great thing for the believers who are here on earth, and it's going to be the worst possible scenario for literally everyone else. Because when Jesus comes back, if you guys know in the Bible, he's referred to as the lion and the lamb. His first coming was as the lamb. His second coming will be as the lion. Why? Because he's going to come back to literally save Israel and take on the armies of Satan that have rebelled around the entire world, who have sided with Satan, who have taken the mark of the beast. And he's going to come back to defeat his enemies and quite literally toss all of his enemies into the lake of fire. That's what's going to happen during this time period. So I want to go here to Luke, and this is going to be a good shadow here of how we're going to end this one. And this is Luke 17, 26 to 37. And then there was the days of Noah. Sorry, let me rephrase that. It says, and as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. So what we're talking about here with the days of Noah, we're talking about the flood. We're talking about the flood that completely wiped out the earth outside of Noah and his family. All of humanity died outside of Noah and his family, his 3 sons and their son's wife and his wife. They were the only ones who survived this. And what Jesus is talking about here is that none of these people who are doing wickedness are going to be prepared for what comes next. And he says here in 27, they ate, they drank, they married wives, and they were given in marriage. I mean, quite literally talking about the fallen angels here when he talks about this. Until the day that Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, it will also be in the days of Lot. They ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, and they built. Okay, what are the days of Lot? I mentioned this a few times during some of our interviews with Spencer and with Shadsworth. The days of Lot is talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, when the evil that they were doing in Sodom and Gomorrah. And then guess what happened? Hellfire and brimstone literally came from the heavens, dropped down into Sodom and Gomorrah, and destroyed everything. And then Jesus says here, but on that day, Lot went out of Sodom, and it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so it will be when the Son of Man is revealed. And that day, who is on the house step? His goods are in the house. Let him not come down to take them away. And likewise, the one who is in the field, let him not turn his back. Remember Lot's wife, which is a warning here of what's going to happen during this time period. What happened to Lot's wife after God told them not to look back at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and she looked back and got turned into a little salt pillar and dust? Yeah, there's a warning. Whoever shall seeks to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life will preserve it. And I will tell you that on that night there will be 2 men in one bed. One will be taken and the other one will be left. 2 women will be grinding their teeth together. One will be taken and the other one will be left. 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other will be left. And then they answered to him, where, Lord? So he said, wherever the body is, where the eagles will be gathered together. Now, for some of you guys, you might be looking at that. It's like, that's a lot of imagery there. I don't really understand what the parable there means, because Jesus talks in a lot of parables, and he does that for a reason. Because when you look at the Bible, if a non-believer reads the Bible and they try to understand a lot of these parables, it's not going to make any sense to them whatsoever. However, when you understand the Bible, when you're guided by the Holy Spirit reading the Bible, you start knowing exactly what he's talking about here. So the takeaway of here is that when Jesus comes back, when he comes back to take on the armies of Satan and the armies of the world who have sided with Satan, it's not going to be a great day for them, because they're not going to see it coming, right? because they've essentially believed all the lies of the world, that Jesus isn't coming back, that there's not going to be a second coming, there's not going to be a battle of Armageddon, there's not going to be all the stuff that we talk about in Revelation. None of that stuff is real. None of that stuff is actually going to happen. So they're going to live life under the guise that this event is not occurring. However, God said this event will occur and that this will happen. So the ones who are not prepared for what comes next, they're going to be completely unguarded or unprepared for what happens, just as it was in the days of Noah when God said that he was going to flood the earth and destroy it. All the people who were doing wickedness didn't see it coming. They were all living life like nothing was going to happen to them. And then next thing you know, giant flood. Same thing with Sodom and Gomorrah. They were doing wickedness there, and they thought nothing was going to happen to them. And the next thing you know, fire literally came down on top of them, and they were completely wiped out. So all the wicked people in the world are not going to be prepared for what happens next. And I'm going to get to you here a kind of a window of what's actually going to happen here. Ain't going to be any tolerance on that. Yeah. But by that point, when we're in the tribulation period, the 7-year tribulation period, there's going to be a line in the sand drawn. There's a lot of people who kind of look at it as like, well, I'm not going to choose a side, or, I don't believe in this whole thing, so I'm just not going to. No, there's going to be line in the sand. And Jesus said line in the sand is you're either going to be with him or you're going to be against him. So even if you think that you're just going to sit there on the fence or pick a third option or abstain, there is no abstaining in those days, because during that time period, and this is very, very important to note, the existence of God and the existence of evil is going to be so blatant to the entire world, you're not going to be able to say that I didn't know and that I did not see this coming. You're not going to be able to use that excuse, because evil in that world during that time period is going to be so blatant. The world will literally rally behind Satan against God and against his people during this time period. So there isn't going to be any, oh, no, hey, if only someone had told me, or hey, I did. None of that's going to fly here. And I'm going to show you exactly why that's the case, because there's a warning that is given that we talk about, these fallen angels, talk about these beings in there. You're going to see them again. So what are we building up to? What does all this mean here? Okay. What does all this mean at the end of the day? The takeaway that you guys should have here is that there was a time during the days of Noah, which Jesus talked about, where these fallen angels intermingled with humans and they caused many abominations and great evil on the world. And when you see a lot of these stories, we're talking about the Greek gods, the Norse gods, Hinduism, and all this stuff. When you look at it from just a baseline perspective, you're seeing essentially the offspring of what happens when humanity, God's creation, melts with something that is unnatural, that is unclean, and when they come together, it causes an abomination. So ask yourself this question. You can look at it from the perspective of, well, okay, where did the origin of like vampires come from? These vampiric beings that are sort of man, but they're also sort of animalistic, and they drink the blood of humans. Where did that all come from? What about werewolves? These half man, half wolf creatures that go around, that only hunt during night. What about the wolf man? Why is it that all of these Egyptian gods always portray, a tall group of people that all have the heads of dogs? Why is that? Why are they always depicting people like that? Because during a certain time period of the world, that's what these beings actually look like. People that you think is just mythology, just made up stories, they're actually showing you windows that once upon a time, this were how things were. And what is the takeaway here is that Satan, for the very beginning, has always tried to corrupt humanity. If he can't corrupt them by deceiving them, he will quite literally corrupt their DNA by intermingling them with something that is unclean, that is unnatural, that is an abomination in the eyes of God. So where is that leading us towards? How many of you guys have heard the comment of transhumanism? How many of you guys have heard this concept here? This concept that is being actively pushed in our society today. You see this all the time here with this concept that, hey, one day we're going to somehow mix humanity with AI, or we're going to mix it with technology or with robots, or one day it's going to be technology and humanity are going to come together as one. And it's going to be, what is it going to be? It's going to be just like the days of Lot. It's going to be just like the days of, just like the days of Noah, where they were doing the exact same thing. And we see this popularized in our culture today, and people don't really look at the implications of what this actually means. People will go to, quite literally will go to concerts. They will go to concerts and they will see essentially these visuals of humans and robots and artificial intelligence becoming one, and nobody thinks anything of it, right? They'll go there, they'll take out their cell phones, they'll take pictures of it, and they say, oh my god, this is so cool, this is so amazing, this is one of the best things that I've ever seen. And like I said, no one will think anything more of it. But there's a reason why you keep seeing these images being portrayed in the media. There's a reason why you're constantly seeing these images of humanity looking like robots, or looking like technology looking like humans. How many realistic looking robots have you seen being crafted or being worked on over the last several years? And think about this here for a second, right? The last time that Satan tried to corrupt the DNA of humanity, we ended up getting the flood. It was God literally destroying the world. So what you have here is that you're having I don't know how people look at this and don't think that this is just completely evil and sinister. I mean, you just look at it. But besides the point, you have essentially a plan here to once again corrupt humanity, corrupt the DNA of humanity, because what is the end game of transhumanism ultimately? What is the end game of these people? And you've heard people say this before. They want to essentially get to this point where AI and technology either replaces humanity or we could become one with technology. Because why? These people want to live forever. These people want to live for... Now, there's probably a very good reason why these people want to live forever. Because if you're on the side of who they're on the side with, you probably don't want to die, because I think you know exactly where you're going next, right? So for their perspective, there's probably a sense of urgency here to essentially live as long as they possibly can. Now, this is what happens when you try to go against God's design, because what God has told us is that those who place their faith in Jesus Christ will not die but will live forever. Now, he's not talking about the flesh. The flesh is going to die one way or another. We're all going to die one way or another. Now, some of us may die a little earlier, some of us may die a little later, but our number is going to be up eventually one of these days, unless, the rapture happens in the next few years. But that's a whole other conversation. We'll get into that later. But we all have a date, right? Because that's just the way that our bodies work. But these people think that they can somehow beat death and beat God by saying that, well, if we can somehow implode our consciousness, or essentially find ways to, fix our, bodies, fix our organs, that we can live a lot longer than we can essentially defy God by defeating death. The only person who's ever defeated death is Jesus Christ, period. And he said that those that place his faith in that death, in that burial, in that resurrection, will have everlasting life. So even when you die, your spirit will live with God forever. If you don't do that, then that's what's going to happen. Your spirit is going to be essentially annihilated in a lake of fire that burns forever and ever and ever. And we talked about how long forever and ever is. It's a really, really long time. Think about how long you've been on this planet. Think about how old you are right now. Think about how long you've been on this planet. And think that is only a micro fraction of forever. So think about essentially being in a burning pit for forever and ever, forever and ever. It's not a fun sight for a lot of these people, which is why you're seeing them do stuff like this, which is why you're seeing them trying to fast forward humanity to a point where we can have the interaction of humans and AI. Here you see another representation of it here in this video. And this one kind of looks more directly like a Nephilim, like a fallen angel, like you can call it an alien, because keep in mind there's a reason why they're pushing that alien narrative in the media. Now, I'm pretty sure you guys have noticed this one in movies and in commercials and in the news, try to normalize this idea of why would they be normalizing this? Because it almost feels like they're trying to normalize you for something that they know is coming. Yeah, I just want you guys to think about that for a second. It's almost like they're trying to normalize you for something that they know is coming. So what do they know is coming? What do they know is coming down the road here? What is it that it seems that all of these people are trying to prepare for? We talked about this with a real quick sidebar here. There was a movie that came out on Netflix not too long ago. It's Leave the World Behind. I want to say it was the name of the movie. It was Julia Roberts, Ethan Hawke. It's the one that essentially Barack Obama produced. Former President Obama produced a movie that was essentially about the end of the world, or at least, the end of our known world. There was a false flag attack by the government to make it seem like we were being invaded, and all of a sudden people started killing each other, and it just caused worldwide chaos. Yet all of these people who were in the know, all these people who were either, the rich people, the politicians, the ones who would get kind of like the Iggy, as you like to say, that, something comes down the pike and we want to avoid it. They thought that they were in a position to avoid what comes next. And when you're on the side of wickedness, you're essentially trying to delay the inevitable. And it's not just wicked human beings. There's demons, there's fallen angels, there's a lot of other wicked entities that know that their time is coming too, because it's not just going to be humanity burning in the lake of fire as well. It's going to be the fallen angels. It's going to be the demonic realm. All of these people, Satan himself will be in this lake of fire burning forever and ever, because that's what the Bible promises. All of these evil entities, all of these wicked people, they all know that their time is very, very short. Why? Because that's what God said. I'm going to go here to Revelations 9. I'm going to show you here that their time is coming, and their time is going to be so obvious that even here on earth, you're going to see quite literally the resurrection of all of these beings that we thought were just myths, that we thought were just made up things that didn't actually happen. No, we're going to see this happen here again. Revelation chapter 9, this is verses 1 through 11. Now, this is talking about the trumpets of God during the time period. This is essentially during the tribulation period, when people are siding with the Antichrist, when people are siding with the false prophet, when people are siding with Satan, and they're going to war against God's people, both Jews and Christians, during this 7-year period. They're talking about the wrath that is going to be poured out on these people during this time period. And it's not a very fun future for some of these people. So what it says here in chapter 9, and then a fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star which fell from the heaven to the earth. Now, if you look at the biblical context of what that is saying here, a star fell from heaven to the earth, you're really talking about fallen angels, because it goes into great detail about what a star represents in the Bible, references to angels, and we're talking about angels falling from heaven to earth. Those are fallen angels here. And it says, to him was given the key to the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit, and smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke from the pit. Now, when you read the context of this, what is being shown here? We're saying that a fallen angel is going to be given a key to a bottomless pit, and out of that pit, smoke like a great furnace is going to arise. So imagine quite literally a fallen angel given the key to hell, and him opening the key to hell here on earth. When I say that the tribulation period will quite literally be hell on earth, it will quite literally be hell on earth. How do I know that? Let's continue. Then out of the smoke, locusts came out upon the earth, and given to them were power as the scorpions have power on the earth. Now keep in mind, it says locusts here, right? These aren't actual locusts. These aren't like the locusts that we see like on earth, like the little small. No, pay attention to what's being said here. They were commanded to not harm the grass on the earth or any green thing or any tree, but only the men who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And they were given the authority, they were not given the authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. So, who are these locusts that are given essentially authority to torture men for 5 months? Oh, it gets worse here. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. And in those days, very, very important to listen here. In those days, men will seek death and they will not find it. They will desire to die and death will flee from them. So imagine these demonic entities are torturing people who do not have the seal of God for 5 consecutive months. There's no sleep. There's no rest. These people are going to be living so tortured that they're going to literally want to die, and God said death will flee from them. So imagine these people thinking that, oh, this is absolutely horrible. I want to die. I'm going to kill myself. Nope. There'll be no killing yourselves. There'll be no murdering. These things won't be able to kill you. They can't kill you, but they're going to be torturing you for 5 consecutive months during this time period. Now we talked about who are these locusts. What does it say here in verse 7? The shape of the locusts were like horses prepared for battle. Their heads were crowned of something like gold, and they wore faces like the faces of men. And they had the hair like women's hair, and they had teeth that were like lion's teeth, and they had breastplates like a breastplate of a lion, and the sound of their wings were like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. They had tails like scorpion. There were stings over their tails. Their power was to hurt men for 5 months, and they had let me just pause there before I go to 11, because 11 is going to go into a little deeper here, but let's focus on the description here. They're going to have faces like men, hair like women, teeth like lions, breastplates like iron, and the sound of their wings are going to sound like chariots on many horses. Imagine in the future, during this tribulation period, like I say, a taste, a small taste of what hell is going to be like during the time period. But quite imagine all of these Nephilim, these fallen angels, quite literally being loose on the earth and torturing those who are not of God for several months. So all of these mythical gods that we talked about, all of these false gods from all around the world, all of these things that look like, werewolves and vampires and mermaids and all of these other things. Imagine a world in the future during the tribulation where all of these things are going to be seen upon the earth, and they're going to be quite literally torturing millions to, I think at that point in time, if I'm being completely honest with you, you're probably going to see billions of people tortured by these inhuman abominations that have been quite literally on this earth since the very, very beginning. And people who have denied for so long that these things are actually exist, they're going to quite literally see these things live and in the flesh. Now, do you understand why some of these entities might be trying to live as long as they can, or trying to escape death, or trying to delay the inevitable? They all know what's coming. And I do want to point this out here too, because this is a very, very important part here. When he talks about this being that was given the key to open the furnace, the bottomless pit, and they said, and they had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Greek was Abaddon, and in the Greek word it was Apollyon, right? So what they're saying here is that the angel that is responsible for this bottomless pit, this pit to hell, is named Abaddon, which is a fallen angel. So what's happening here, as God is pouring out his wrath on the unbelieving world who have sided with Satan during this time period, he's going to allow a fallen angel to quite literally torture the unbelievers and the wicked rebellion people during this time period. And Awesome One says, I hear a helicopter flying over a strong wind. It's like, I think, oh, this will be the big one. Yeah. Like, and it's very, very interesting too, because I just thought about this. What you're seeing here being played out is also a reference to the Passover, right? Because what is it? We talk about the Passover in Jewish times. It was the time period where, there was a plague, a wrath of God that we saw being put out into the people. However, those who, I believe, put the blood of, I want to say a lamb, I'm not certain if it was the lamb or if it was a cow. I get one of those two confused. I know some of you guys could correct me here, but the ones who put the blood on the door to signify that they were with the Lord, they were essentially passed over by the wrath. So keep in mind, during this time period where hell is literally being broken onto earth, it's not going to be everyone who suffers this torture. There will be people spared. Like I said, people who don't have the seal of God will be spared by these evil beings. It will be the unbelievers. It will be the wicked, the ones who have decided they're going to side with Satan over God. They will be the ones who suffer this torture here. And I bring that up just to point out here that when you read the Bible from the very beginning, from Genesis all the way to Revelation, you see these recurring themes over and over again about how God treats his people, those who are faithful and righteous in his eyes, versus the ones who choose to rebel against him. And I know it might sound mean to some people, or might sound unloving to some people, that why would God allow this thing to happen to these people just because they disobeyed him, right? That's kind of like the atheist way of like looking at this whole situation, where it's like, oh well, so he's gonna allow these people to be tortured endlessly just because they disobeyed him. It's not just because they disobeyed him. It's not because they didn't listen to a command. These people, the ones who get the worst torture, and you see this over and over and over again, the worst punishment, the worst wrath, are the ones who decided to actively rebel against God. People during this time period are not simply going to just be disobeying God. They're going to be siding with Satan and going to war against God. So they've already made the conscious choice during this time period that they're not siding with God, they're not siding with Christ, they're on the side of evil. So like I said, with the whole mark of the beast, people always panic about the mark of the beast. It's like, oh, is it Elon Musk's brain chip? Is it the COVID shot? The Bible makes it very, very clear. The mark of the beast is not something that you're ever going to get tricked into getting. It's not like you're going to be out at a Walmart one night, you go in for a flu shot, and it's like, oh wait, I didn't know that was the mark of the beast. I didn't want to take. That's not how the mark of the beast works. The mark of the beast during this time period is quite literally going to be people who make the conscious choice to side with Satan over God. This is not something you're going to get tricked into, especially when you actually see what the beast is. It's going to be quite literally a mark from a beast. This isn't something that you're going to get tricked into. This isn't something that you accidentally took 10 years ago. You didn't know what it is. It's like these are people actively making the choice to side with evil in the face of a holy God. And because they've made that choice, they're going to get essentially what they've decided. These are people who have made the choice that I don't want to be with God. I don't want to be in eternity in paradise. I'd rather perish than be with the Almighty. So what is God going to do? God's going to give them exactly what they wish. You want to rebel against the Most High, just like Satan? Well, then you're going to get exactly what you wish. You're going to get an eternity completely cut off and completely separated from God, because that's what you honestly want in your heart. So it's not God being mean, it's God giving you exactly what you desire here. So here's listening while I work. How you doing, Brandon? So that's kind of the point that I wanted to leave up here. So let me kind of summarize this whole video here. If you listened to us last week, we talked about how the story of the Nephilim is very true. And the reason why we know it's true, because one, we know that the Bible is infallible and it's the true word of God. But even if you don't want to look at the biblical text, you can see so many examples and references to the Nephilim that once lived on this world all over our society, all over our history. Like I said, we're talking about countries and nations that never once sided with God. We're looking at Greek mythology, Indian mythology, Rome, all these places here. They're all telling you the exact same story, which is telling you that, yes, at some point this actually did happen. And then even in modern times, we're essentially paying homage to those same Nephilim figures, those same fallen angel figures, except for we're giving homage to those characters in the form of entertainment. So now you're seeing them as comic book characters, you're seeing them as movie characters, you're seeing them as video game characters. All of these references to fallen angels, to demons, to Nephilim, to all of these occult ties. But because you're being fed to them in entertainment, you don't actually see the true origin, the true demonic origin of these things that are in the world. So what should I say to those out there who are listening to this? And I think Awesome One has a big thing. I think many Christians think that they're going to be rescued from the wrath of Satan ahead instead of going home. You know what, Awesome One? You actually just gave me a great parallel here to next week's episode, but I do want to hold that for 1 second. I do want to make one final point here. What you're seeing here is that this stuff is real. And when you read Revelation, it is a warning of what's to come. And what should be taken away here is that a lot of people will read Revelation and think that it's a scary book, as it's horrifying reality. And you have to understand this. You don't have to go through the tribulation. I know that we can get into this whole conversation about, well, is there a post-tribulation rapture or a pre-tribulation rapture? I'm on the side of pre-tribulation rapture. I'll do a future episode explaining exactly why. You don't have to essentially experience this wrath. And what God is telling you here is that this is a wrath that you can easily avoid. And the very easy way of avoiding this is essentially believing the gospel of Jesus Christ and putting your faith in Jesus to not only be your savior from the hell to come, but literally your savior from the wrath of God, which is to occur as well. Because there's a time that this is happening here. And there's a lot of people who have plans in, let's say, very, very high places right now that are setting up for what's about to come next. And a lot of people are sleepwalking through this whole thing. I believe there's a lot of people out there who have never genuinely heard the true gospel of Jesus Christ. And when we look at the gospel that saves you, it's putting your faith into the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. That Christ came down, God incarnate came down to save man from their own sins. He was hung up on the cross, he was crucified, he was buried, and he rose again 3 days later, proving that he has defeated death and that he has broken us from our bondage of sin. That those who place their faith in Jesus Christ will be saved from the wrath that is to come from hell, and will be given everlasting life. Because that's what Jesus said. It just believe and put your faith in him, and you will be saved and you will be spared. And when you read these stories of what's to come, you're not gonna fear these stories, because because God's word is true, he will spare you from what is to come. So you don't have to worry about being tortured by Nephilim and demons and fallen angels and the whole thing and being thrown into. You don't have to worry about any of that, because God has said all men have fallen guilty in the eyes of God. But Jesus has already paid your penalty for you, and all he asks for is return, is your faith in him, and he will take the penalty for your sins, because he's already taken the penalty for your sins, and you will be saved and you will be spared. It's a very, very easy gospel. It's a very, very easy message. And because so many people fight it, they make it harder than it needs to be. But what God is saying here is that the good news is that if you put your faith in God, you put your faith in Christ, you do not have to worry about any of this. Because when you're on the side of God, there is nothing that can overcome you. Nothing that Satan can do, nothing that these demons can do, nothing that these fallen angels can do. They have already lost. What the Revelation is saying is that they've already lost. They're just delaying the inevitable. And if you're one with Christ, you have already won. So that's kind of my takeaway here. A couple of notes here. It says I have nothing to offer. Just listen to another viewpoint from my own. Yeah. So as I said, hopefully this is some eye-opening information. I did leave you guys some of the videos. I'll put those in a link that you guys can watch those on your own time. Maybe you guys can go into your own rabbit hole on some of these things, because like I said, I can only go over kind of very surface level information on this topic without going too far over time. But I definitely left those videos up there for you, because like I said, there's some very, very interesting information that even I didn't know going into this, but this is why I did a lot of this research going into it beforehand. So it's very, very interesting stuff. Hopefully you guys look at the last 2 weeks and it kind of opens your eyes to some things that you probably didn't consider before, and it'll be a great path forward for a lot of you people. It says I keep wondering how anti-woke people will react when the Antichrist is in charge. I will say this, and this might upset some people, but it's true, and I'm seeing this happen now. I noticed that a lot of the quote-unquote anti-woke people in our culture right now, a lot of these right-wing influencers and stuff like that are very, very popular on social media, you have to keep in mind that just because they're on the right does not mean that they're on the side of Christ. And this applies to a lot of people. This isn't just one specific group, because you can look at a lot of Catholics, a lot of Muslims, a lot of non-woke people who probably say a lot of things that you would probably agree with as a Christian, but at the end of the day, they're not on the same side of God. And I've also noticed with a lot of these people here too, is that not only are they embracing a lot of the elements of Antichrist, but they're essentially siding with quite literally what would be the siding ground of the Antichrist, and they don't even realize it. I know there's a lot of people here who have very jaded views on the nation of Israel. Here's what you have to understand about the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel right now is under the judgment of God. There's no doubt about it right now. Does that mean that right now the nation of Israel is a friend to Jesus Christ? No. We know that because the Bible tells us this. The Bible tells us that they rejected Christ as their Messiah. And as a result of this, they're still trying to essentially craft a kingdom for this Messiah that's yet to come, not realizing that the Messiah has already come, right? Now, there's going to be a judgment on the nation of Israel in the future for their disbelief. So don't take this as somehow the Jews and the nation of Israel are going to get off easy on this whole situation. Why? Because the entire point of the tribulation is for them. It's God's judgment on them and the unbelievers. And guess what? They're part of the unbelievers. Now, what the Bible does say is that there will be a time in the future where the nation of Israel will reconcile with Jesus Christ. And that comes when the armies of Satan have surrounded them, and it will be Jesus and only Christ who comes to save them. And that's the whole point of the second coming. But before we get there, there's a lot of people right now in our sphere, both anti-woke and woke, who are actively siding against the nation of Israel, placing themselves in essentially the corner of the Antichrist and the Antichrist's, I guess you could say, side, enemy, militia. There's a whole bunch of ways to say it here, but there's a lot of people who are already putting themselves on the side of the Antichrist right now, and they don't even realize it. And this is going to be a rude awakening for those people when we do get into this. Because there's a lot of people who say that, no, Israel is not, the real Israel. The church is Israel. We deny the God's redemption of Israel. There's a lot of people out there waving Palestine flags right now, not understanding what that whole thing means. If this whole thing goes down the way that I believe it's going down, the way the Revelation says that it's going down, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be surprised that they're not on the side that they thought they were when this all comes around. So people need to smarten up and smarten up fast. I'll have something with Spencer later on here, but I did want to go back to this one because this is actually kind of be my I guess my teaser for next week's episode 36, which will be next week. By the way, I should let you guys know this now. Next week's episode is going to be the last one on Monday night, and here's what's going to happen. Next week, I'll be here on Monday. After next week's show, which is on the 25th, I'm moving the show to Sunday. So I haven't given a specific time yet. I will let you guys know on multiple shows leading up to it what the time frame is going to be. I'm thinking right now either I'm going to keep it at the same time, which is about 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Sunday, or it's going to be 7 o'clock on Eastern on Sunday. But what we're going to do is that I'm going to move the show to Sunday because I know that a lot of Bible content is consumed a lot better on Sundays for the obvious reasons. And a lot of people are more likely to consume these type of content on a day where they're free. They're kind of like already in the Word. They're looking for more things. So I want to move the show to Sunday. Next Monday night's going to be the last one. Is on Monday. Then we're going to move it over to a Sunday. I will have lots of information for you guys to keep you guys in tow. As well, I want you guys to know that we also do have a second channel that has been finished. All of our previous Bible Lens episodes are on the channel here. I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys a quick little thing here so that you guys can see it too. It's called Society Reviews Bible Lens. I don't have a lot of subscribers on here right now because I haven't really promoted it yet. I haven't really I haven't really done too much work on it, but you guys can follow it over here. I will be working on building this site as a secondary channel for more Bible exclusive content. And then once I have a satisfactory enough subscriber base here and listening base, I probably will move this show over there, but this will stay here on this show for the foreseeable future, but it will be moving to Friday nights here. So Israel went full left a while ago. Yeah, like I said, they're under the judgment of God too. So like I said, do not take this as, no, I'm just blindly defending Israel here. If you guys actually understand the biblical context of what's about to happen, they are not going to be spared from what comes next. And they're very hard-headed people, and they're going to have to find out their lessons the hard way too, just like a lot of other people are. Henry Thorne joining us here on the last episode. Now, going back to what I was trying to say here, next week's episode 36, and Austin brought up a good point here. It says, I think that many Christians think that they're going to be raptured from the wrath of Satan instead of going home. Here's the thing, and this is going to be essentially what we're talking about. The title for next week's episode is Christians in Name Only, Because there's a lot of people out there right now who think that they are Christians who truly are not. And I'm seeing a lot of people defending people claiming to be Christians who truly are not. This is very something that we see very popularized in kind of the Hollywood sphere, where every time Kanye West says something about Jesus, everyone assumes that he's a Christian, right? Or Taylor Swift, oh, she has to be like a Christian because she says that she's a Christian. Brie Larson, all these other people, right? Here's the reality. There's a lot of people who have deceived themselves into thinking that they're Christians. And next week, we're going to expose the fact that these people are not truly Christians at all. And even if you do believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, there's going to be a lot of people who probably will not make the cut from the pre-tribulation rapture because they haven't actually placed their faith in Jesus Christ. And we're going to talk about exactly why this is a big problem in the Christian circles, in Christianity in general. But that's next week's show. Next Monday night, episode 36, we're going to talk about that very topic. So, Brie Larson, yeah, I've heard. Well, if you notice, Brie Larson and a lot of her red carpet like dresses and whatnot is always wearing some kind of like diamondized like cross. I think she's even claimed in media before that she's a Christian. Now, obviously, her beliefs are very, very far away from what Christianity actually preaches. But look, she's not the only one who thinks this way. You've probably heard Taylor Swift say that she's a Christian. The Kardashians claim that they're Christians. I mean, this is what we have to do this episode next week. There's a lot of people out there claiming to be Christians who are not on your side, and we need to stop defending these people as if they're brothers and sisters in Christ, because they're really not. So that's going to be our episode next week. Going to be a very interesting episode there. I'm going to go ahead and give a quick little shout out to everyone who joined us on the show here tonight. It was a very interesting show, very interesting couple of weeks. So Dante, Spencer, a quick little shout out to you. Awesome one. Vanya, who was here for a little bit. Brandon, Mike has bad knees. Give a shout out to you as well. Who else we got? And then Henry, because you joined in here a little bit late. Keith over on our Rumble page. Thank you all for joining me for this episode. By the way, if we almost got to promote what we got coming up next tomorrow night. Tomorrow night is the Barroom Podcast. We're gonna be back here at 9 p.m. tomorrow night. I'm actually really looking forward to tomorrow night's episode, and here's why I'm looking forward to it. It's because we're going to get really deep into some topics. It's not going to be your traditional barroom podcast where we're just talking about like the celebrities like of the week and talking about these stories. I want to get really in depth with tomorrow's episode. So there's going to be some deep conversations here because the topics is going to be one, Kanye West admitting that he was never a Christian because Jesus didn't answer his prayers. We'll talk about some other things that he says to prove that he was never a Christian to begin with. That's tomorrow night. Lucy Hale has finally admitted to having a drinking problem. I know this is not necessarily a news story, but I do want to talk about the implications of this and what it means for modern women, especially women in the entertainment industry, because this is something very important we need to talk about tomorrow night as well. Hollywood is trying to expose Dan Schneider right now. Are they actually exposing Dan Schneider, or are they essentially just framing themselves to be the heroes, a lot like they did with Harvey Weinstein? We'll talk about that tomorrow night as well. And then Mr. Beast has distanced himself from a content creator following very, very loose allegations of misconduct. And I find it very interesting that he kicked off this guy from his platform, yet he still allows Chris Titan to be on the show. We'll talk about this tomorrow night too. So it's going to be a very, very interesting show tomorrow night. Tomorrow night is going to be a very interesting episode. Definitely check us out for that one. Who said just got back from playing best. Yeah, good time there. Left-wing Catholics support abortion, claiming that, yeah, well, like I said, I've mentioned this many times before. There's the overwhelming majority of Catholics in this country are actually Democrats, are actually liberals, and people don't make that connection. They think that Catholics are like based in trad pills. Like, no, that's not the case at all. That's a minority compared to the majority in this country. But we'll talk about that next week here on this show. So join us for the Barroom tomorrow night. Friday night, we have another Friday night movie club. We're going to be reviewing 3 films this week. Roadhouse. We're going to be reviewing the new Sydney Sweeney movie, Immaculate. And we're also going to be reviewing the new Ghostbusters film that's coming out this Friday. Like I said, next Monday night, we'll be back here, episode 36, talking about why people who call themselves Christians are not actually Christians. So until then, thank you all for joining me here for this show. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys look into a lot of the information that I gave you guys so that you guys can learn some of this stuff on your own time. Maybe figure out some things that I wasn't able to cover here on this show. Until then, adios, goodbye. I will see you guys hopefully tomorrow night. So, night, guys.
Once I turned to Jesus and I realized how he had changed my outlook on life, not just softball, but understanding how much I have to live for, and that's living to exemplify the kingdom. And I think that brings so much freedom.
David, I know share a strong faith. How does that help you on a night like tonight?
It's everything. Christ's resurrection is everything. Not just his life, but his death and resurrection. You can only get that through him, the Holy Spirit only through him. No false prophets, no Muhammad, no anyone else. Only Jesus Christ himself.
Let me tell you one more thing. This might be the most important thing you'll ever hear. There is true freedom, a freedom that no one can take from you in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Don't ever forget that. If you remember one thing I say, remember that.
I've got lots to tell you. Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved.
Now your reaction to what people who want you off this property shortly?
Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved.
And what about you being stripped of your belt? I mean, that's you must be very unhappy with that. What's your reaction to that?
Jesus loves me. He loves you too, and he loves you too. He loves these people in here, and he loves everybody in the world. All you've got to do is repent of your sins, and you will be forgiven.